The primary metaphor that evolved out of the Bible and out of astrotheology is that the truth is the light. That's a primary metaphor for the Bible, which came out of astrotheology. Now, Jesus is depicted in the story of the Gospels as the truth. Okay? Jesus is depicted as the truth. And Jesus is called the light, and the light is a metaphor for the truth. So if you think that you're going to die and see an actual light, maybe you will see a light, but I'll tell you what, whatever that light is that's not God. That's not God. That's not the real God. So physical light is physical light, and that's not God. The true light of God, which is spoken about in the Bible, is the truth. The truth is the light of God, right? It's not a physical light. But physical light is used as a metaphor for the truth. Physical light is used as a metaphor for the truth. And so as we get close to the winter time, the winter solstice, the Christmas season, we'll find that we celebrate the birth of Christ over the winter solstice period. And some people have a problem with that, but I think it's fantastic. And some people think that that means that we're worshiping the sun, but I don't. I don't think that means we're worshiping the sun. I think that the sun in the sky, it can be used symbolically to mean the light of God, which is the truth, not the light of the sun. It's just that, see, in the Bible, well, let's put it this way. In the Egyptian religion, the story of what's happening in the sky, because the sky tells a story. Those are the heavens. So the heavens tell a story. They tell a story of lights going across the sky. See, that tells a story. Year after year, year after year, it tells the same story of lights going across the sky in a certain pattern. You have the moon phases. You have the 4 seasons of the sun. You have the 7 primary lights of the sky, which are the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are visible from the naked eye by man when looking up into the sky. So you can see those 7 lights. Now there's also the constellations, and there's the 12 constellations. Sometimes people say 13, but generally it's 12 constellations. In the Bible it's God in the 12. Okay, it's God in the 12 tribes, and then it's Jesus and the 12 disciples. So that theme of God and the 12 is a common theme. Now, why would the Israelites be writing their stories around that theme? Because like the Egyptians wrote stories about the heavens, and they turned those natural forces into their gods, and they mythologized those natural forces as their gods, the Israelites took those same natural phenomena occurring in the heavens and made it a story about themselves as the Israelites. So it's a story of the Israelites, not gods. It's the story of the Israelites. Whereas in Egypt, the things, the stars and the planets moving across the sky symbolized the gods. Where in the story of the Israelites, it's God in the 12 tribes. Now, one common error that I've noticed a lot of Christians make is that they think that the old gods were demons. This is not the case. The old gods of Egypt and Chaldea and pretty much everywhere, Canaan, were just natural phenomena. Storm gods were a big one. Everyone had a storm god. The Egyptians had what was really centered around the moon and all the lights playing out on the moon. I've made other videos about that. Chaldea, the gods of Chaldea, the Anunnaki, are not demons. They're not aliens. They are the wind, the rain, the water, the sun, the moon, Venus, the planets. That's what the Anunnaki are. If they were something else, they were something else. But the stories of the Anunnaki are stories of natural phenomena. So, whereas the Chaldeans and the ancient Babylonians made stories about the stars as gods, the Egyptian made stories about the stars and planets as gods, the Israelites made stories about the stars and planets as the Israelites. And so that's why you have 12 tribes of Israel, and that's why you have Jesus and the 12 disciples. So now, where does Abraham come from? Let's switch gears here for a second. Abraham comes from Ur, and Ur means light. Okay, in the ancient languages, the city of Ur is the city of light, and Abraham was an Aramaean, and Ar means light, and his people came down from Aram. And Ar in Aram means light. And they came down before that from Ararat. And Ar means light. Now, so in the Bible, we have Ur means light. And in a different dialect, it's Ar. They say Ar. And then in Hebrew, it's Yar. So Yar or Yar. Ar and Ur. So those are the different words which refer to light. Jericho is actually Yaracho. Yar-aho. Aho or Ah. Ah is moon. Yara is light of the moon. Era is the light of the moon. An era is a unit of time based on the moon. Jerusalem is Yar-Rusalem. I based on what that means, it appears to mean the lights of the gods. Yarus, El-Lim. That appears to say lights of the gods or the light of the gods. So we know that Jerusalem was originally a pagan temple. And then it was changed into a monotheism when it was conquered by the Israelites. However, they conquered it either through force or through the spread of their doctrine. I think it was probably closer to just spreading the doctrine. But we're not going to go into that. I just wanted you to know that Yar means light. And so when you have the menorah, the 7-light menorah, there's 7 lights because those are the 7 lights which are in the sky. And you have the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Those are the 7 lights which you can see from the surface of the earth. So that's why you have the 7-candle menorah. And I believe one of the lights was kept burning at all time, and that would be a reference to the sun. The 9-candle menorah of the Hanukkah season, in my opinion, is a false. It's just it's probably a Roman story. That's my belief. There is no 9-candle menorah. It's a 7-candle menorah, and that was because it was based on astrology, basically. The ancient people of Egypt, Chaldea, the Israelites, they were all stargazers. The difference is there was a code of the Israelites which they did not worship any gods but the Creator, who was the God of the Israelites. Whereas the other races worshipped the gods, the sun god, the moon god. They said these are also gods, whereas the Israelites said no. There's the Creator God, and these are His creations, which, frankly, it comes from an Egyptian ideology, which said that Atum is the Creator, the self-created, and all the other gods are His creations. So it's not that far off from the Egyptian theology, but with a different code. And also, the part of this code was that there was to be no depiction, there's to be no idol created of the God of Israel. But that doesn't mean you can't make stories about the God of Israel, which they did. They did make stories of the God of Israel. And so some people think these stories, they take them literally, and that's a mistake. It's a mistake to take the stories literal. It's the way to understand the story is to understand that there is a teaching to the story. And if you take it all literally, then you're going to miss the point. So So now, with the story of Christ, Christ is called the light. He's called the light. Jesus is the light of life, the light of men. He's the Word of God. He's the King of Judah. Okay? So the King of Judah is the Word of God. And the Word of God is the light of life and the light of men. Okay? And he's also called the truth. Jesus says, I am the truth. Okay? So now, this is the important thing. It's not a physical light. There is no physical light of God. God is not in space. God is not going to come down from heaven. He's not in space. It's the light of God, which is the truth. And I think that one of the best stories that depicts this in the Old Testament is Genesis, the story of Joseph in Egypt when he's confronted with the Pharaoh's wife who wants to, get it on with him. She wants to go to bed with Joseph, right? And he says, no, I can't do that because that's wrong. You're the Pharaoh's wife, and I can't do that because it's wrong. Because Joseph had the truth, right? He had the truth. He knew the truth. The truth was that was the wrong thing to do. And so she comes back and says, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell the Pharaoh that you raped me, and you're going to be thrown in prison and probably killed. And he says, well, I still can't do it because it's wrong to do, and that's the truth. In other words, you can tell who his God was, the God of Joseph, by that story, because he held firm to the truth. It was the truth which indicated that he was an Israelite, right? So the God of Israel, according to the story of Joseph, is the God of truth, righteousness, and doing what is right. So if you have the truth, then in that story, you're an Israelite, right? So that's how you can identify a true Israelite and the true religion of Israel through that story. That's why Jesus is called the truth. That's why Jesus is called the light, the Word of God. The Word of God is the truth. Now, every day in your life, you're confronted with these situations. Should I do this? Should I do that? And you have the truth. You know what the truth is, and you know what the lie is, and you know what is right, and you know what is wrong, and you know how to, so doing right would be righteous, and it would be following what is true. And this is the core teaching of the Bible, the Genesis story, and indicates specifically who the God of Israel actually is. It's not a God in space. It's not a God in heaven. There is no God in space. Space is a dimension of the mind. It's a dimension of thought. It's not where God is. God is the path. The path to finding out the true God is going along this path of truth. What is true? You see. Now, so now I would just want to point out also that Joseph didn't have a Bible to tell him what the truth was. He didn't have a Bible to tell him he didn't have a book to read to tell him this is the Word of God and here it all is and it's all written down for you. No, he got the Word of God through his soul, through his spirit, through his conscience, which means to know with. So he knew the truth. The truth came to him, just like it comes to all of us, through our soul. This is communion with the true Creator God of the universe, of the Bible, the God that's talked about in the Bible, the God that's written about in the Bible. This is the key to communion with the supreme God of the Bible, which is the truth, which comes to you through your soul, through your conscience, through your spirit. It doesn't come to you from some other way. Now, it's described in the Bible in many different ways, and you can determine if some of those. But those are the writings of men, and you should not be confused. You could say that these writings were inspired by this God, which I just explained in the story of Joseph. See, they were inspired by this idea, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't men who wrote it down. And so there could be errors there, and so you should always keep your own counsel according to what you know is true. Always to what you know is true, because that is the pathway to the real, true God of Israel, according to the story, right? Now, in the story of Christ, he's killed at Golgotha, which means the skull. Golgotha is the skull. And Christ is the light. Christ is the Word of God. And we celebrate his birth on the winter solstice, because this is the time when the sun has died, and then it is actually the beginning of the solar year is the winter solstice. So it's the birth of the sun in the sky, which is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the Christ, the truth, the light of God, the Word of God, in the story of the four Gospels. I believe that the four Gospel story of Christ is an allegory. I don't believe that he was a flesh and blood person. I believe it's a story about the truth coming to among the people of Judah. Who there was an argument between the Israelites about how to teach the religion. So this gets into the Talmud. The Pharisees and Sadducees, they were preaching their own doctrine, which is the Talmud. And this was not what this other faction of Israelites said should be the teaching. And so that they created the story about God, the Word of God, coming to as a man and being murdered by the Jews at Golgotha. And of course, Golgotha is the skull. And when Christ was crucified at Golgotha, the lights went out. The sky became dark. Darkness came over the earth because that was the light going out. But it's metaphorical. You have to understand it's a metaphor. But the metaphor is they're using physical light as a metaphor for the spiritual light of truth. See, the truth is the thing. If you have the truth, you are a true follower of Christ. If you have the truth, you are a true follower of the God of Israel. And that is the key thing. There really is no other thing more important than that thing. And pastors who don't see that are to that degree not fully following God. So, you'd ask me, who's a true Christian? Well, some people would say I'm not a true Christian because I believe that the Christ story is an allegory. But I would say if you don't have the truth, if you don't worship the truth, if you don't follow the truth at every juncture of your life and do what is right, well, that's the key. That's the practice of the religion of Abraham, and that's the practice of the religion which is talked about from the time of Noah and the sons of Noah and Abraham and Joseph and Christ. Christ is different though. The Christ story, Christ is depicted as this item of the truth. He's depicted as he's a symbol of the truth, being killed at Golgotha, which is the skull. The lights go out. When Christ is murdered at Golgotha, a darkness comes over the earth. Now, the last thing I want to say, and I think this is an important point, is because some people get all upset about the winter solstice being the time that we celebrate the birth of Christ. But if you compare Genesis 1:3 and John 1:5, you will see that John 1:5 is a retelling of Genesis 1:3 as Christ as the light. And Christ is the truth, right? He's depicted as the Word of God. The Word of God is the light of the world. So in Genesis 1:3, the light of the world is the sun. The sun is the physical light of the physical world. But metaphorically, Jesus Christ, the Word of God, is the light of God. He's the light of the world. In that he's the truth, not a physical light. Using the idea of a physical light of the sun as a symbol for the truth. Now that theme plays out both in the Old Testament, as I said, and in the New Testament with God and the 12, the golden ark, and the 12 tribes following the golden ark, crossing the Jordan on the Passover, going from east to west, crossing the Jordan on the Passover. Okay, following the golden ark, which goes ahead of them and wipes out their enemies, and they follow behind. Okay, and then you have, what was the last thing I was going to say? And then you have the story. Okay, so then you have the story of Christ and his 12 disciples. But if you look at Genesis 1:3 and compare it to Genesis John 1:5, he talks about in Genesis 1:3 that God said, "Let there be light," and the light separated the day from the night. Now in John 1:5 it says, and a light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Right? So it separates the day from the night. the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So there's a separation of there between those who understand and those who live in darkness. And we see that same idea. Okay, so when you're reading the Bible, this is how you know this is the original basis of the religion, right? Because it's God and the 12. This theme plays out over and over and over again through the Bible. It doesn't play out in books like the writings of the Muslims. It doesn't play out as God and the 12 in the Torah. I'm not in the Torah, I'm sorry, the Talmud. Because those religions moved away from the original teaching, which was oriented around this idea that of the light and the theme of God and the 12, because that's the story in the heavens. So it's a connection to actual natural phenomena of the story in the heavens. And that's where you get the teaching of the light being the truth, you see? Because it takes you from this physical light, and it uses that as a metaphor to teach you about the truth. And the truth is something very real, which you have within you. And this we call the Word of God. This we call Christ, right? Christ is this thing called the truth. So that's how the story plays out. In the story, of course, Jesus, the people were asked to decide and choose between Jesus and Barabbas. So Jesus represents the truth of the Word of God. The King of Judah. That's who they're supposed to follow, right? He was born the King of Judah, which is the Word of God. The Word of God is the King of Judah, and the Word of God is the truth, and it's the light of God. You see, because it's the truth. And then you have Barabbas, who you could view. I kind of view it as the teachings of the rabbis, which you have in the Talmud. It's their own teachings. And so this plays out, and Jesus says in another part of the Gospels, beware the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Beware their teachings. And he says in another passage that they came to teach their own doctrines instead of the teachings of the God of Israel. So this is critical to the story of the four Gospels. This is why the story was written. It was written because of an argument between those who are following the rabbis and their Talmud and their teachings versus what this other faction said was the true teaching. And I agree with the faction that says that the light of God is the truth. And it's the truth which is the most important thing above all other items to determine what the real God is. See, this is the point. The religion evolved out of paganism, but as it became more and more and more refined and perfected, people came to understand, well, this is what Abraham is said to have understood, is that all the other gods were false. And that the sun wasn't really a god, and the moon isn't really a god, and these idols aren't really gods, and that there's a creator God. Okay, so that was how the religion began. Okay, and he came down from Aram. He was from the city of Ur, and he came from the Caucasus Mountains, is where his people came from, Ararat. So he was technically an Urian or an Aryan, which weren't the Germans, by the way. They were just a Caucasian people that came down. They weren't the Germans, but they were a Caucasian people that came down, and they mixed later with the Greeks, and the Greeks started to use this term Ari, like Aristotle, right? And then you had a Israelite leader during the Greek period whose name was Aristobulus. So Ari, Aristobulus, Aristotle, Arian, Ararat, Ur, Aram. This is where that comes from. Anyway, so I'll finish with this. So the original religion with Abraham started with this idea that these gods are not real, and that there's a true God, the Creator God. And this is connected to this idea that the light. That's why he was from the city of Ur. And that this represents the true. The city of Ur was because the people that worshipped at that time in Chaldea and Egypt, they viewed the lights in the heavens as the lights of God. These were the gods, and they were the creations of God, however you want to view it. But that's where the metaphor comes from. You have to understand that the entire metaphor of Christ being the truth comes from this idea that the light, that the physical light is a metaphor, or is used as a metaphor for the truth, and that the truth is the quote-unquote light of God the Creator. Because it's not just the creator of the physical world, but it's the God of one's soul, and so that's where you have the truth. That's where you know the truth or the lie. So that's how you can tell, regardless of whatever anyone else says. If someone lives with lies, they're constantly promoting lies in the media. If they're constantly lying in the media, if they're constantly lying, in politics, then that person can never be a true Christian. Even if they said they were a Christian, but they're constantly lying, then they're not a Christian. You see, you can't lie and be also a true follower of Christ, because Christ is the truth. So you don't have Christ if you're lying. If you're lying, you don't have Christ. Now you could say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the story, what I learned, and Jesus was a man, he was killed, and he bled all over the place. That's a story, and I believe that's just an allegory for this thing called the truth. So maybe you could say, maybe in your opinion, I'm not a true Christian. I think that I am, and because I think that it's actually the truth, which is the thing, which is what the story is trying to teach you about. And so, so I would say, in my opinion, that that people who lie about world events, people who lie about all kinds of things in the media, in government, in different parts of political parties, if they're lying, they're not following the truth. And if they're not following the truth, they can't call themselves a Christian. Some of them don't call themselves a Christian. Some of them call themselves some other religion. Some of them say they're atheists. Okay, but if you're a Christian, then that means you follow the truth, and the truth is really the king. The truth is the king, because Christ is the king. Truth is the king, and that is the gateway to the God, the true God, of the Creator God of the universe, and of the ruler of the human soul. And so that is the supreme God above all the gods. Would be the God of the human soul, which is the truth. It is the word of the God of the human soul. So I think I'll end off with that. I think I've covered it pretty thoroughly there. There's a lot more than I can say, but you only have so much time on each video, to upload. So I think we'll stick with that, and have a good evening.